valorize as the foundations of our social order. The Confucians, for instance, valorize those. They see this regularization, this polish, this enforced politeness, this correctness, and the proceduralization of daily life as what generates stability in society. This is the foundation of bureaucracy. It's the foundation of procedural justice, and it's the foundation of high society etiquette. It does keep everything quiet and keeps the frozen smiles on people's faces. The Taoist point, though, is that what it freezes is genuine human interaction. It freezes it out completely. And genuine human interaction and a genuine enjoyment of our lives absolutely vanishes. So we have this wonderful sequence. The highest stage of morality is Tao, harmony with the way of the world, living naturally and spontaneously. The next level down, cultivated virtue, at least having internalized moral qualities that are beneficial. The next level down, studied kindness, not spontaneously doing what you know to be right because it's internalized, but asking yourself, what would the nice thing to do be? The next one down, justice, this kind of ritualized, fossilized, legalized way of dealing with one another. So if we can't be nice, at least we don't get into fistfights in public and start wars. And the evil gets punished and the good gets rewarded. And when justice falls apart, what we have is ritual. And the Taoist point is that every one of these steps of denigration, every step in which we degrade ourselves from a natural state to a totally artificial state, occurs through a single kind of process, cultivation. Cultivation, this positive sense of cultivating ourselves as social human beings as conceived in the Confucian framework. So the idea is, if you begin by people behaving spontaneously with the Tao, and then we ask ourselves, how can we bottle that? How can we cultivate it so that we can train it? What do? We ask, what are people like who behave in this way? And we catalog a set of virtues, something that Aristotle does, something that Confucius does. And so we cultivate those virtues. Then we might ask ourselves, okay, now we know what those virtues are. What kind of person do you need to be in order to become virtuous? And we say, you've got to cultivate kindness, right? That's really important. You've got to turn people into people who think in this particular way. And so we cultivate kindness. And then you might imagine talking to a child about how to be kind. And it moves into be fair to each other, be nice to each other. And we cultivate justice. And finally, we teach please and thank you when we lose all other hope. But for the Taoist, this is exactly what the Confucian model of cultivation is. It's a successive destruction of natural life through civilization. So what we see here is this whole idea that these rigid Confucian concepts destroy our spontaneous perception and engagement. They set up these kind of unattainable goals. And we're going to begin now to see how that emerges through the destructive forces of language and cognition and their particular role in cultivation of this kind of reflective, goal-driven approach to life as opposed to a spontaneous, natural version. So we're going to move back now to chapter 12. And chapter 12 has a wonderful set of paradoxes, but a wonderful set of paradoxes with a very, very deep point. The critique here will be specifically a critique of language, conceptuality, and their role in cultivation. So the chapter begins like this. The 5 colors make our eyes blind. The 5 tones make our ears deaf. The 5 flavors make our mouths numb. Now let's think about that. What in the world could the Tao Te Ching mean when it says that the colors, or as it's sometimes translated, the 5 colors, make our eyes blind, and that the 5 tones make our ears deaf, the 5 flavors make our mouths numb? Well, the 5 tones are the 5 tones in the Chinese classical scale. The colors are the colors that we can name: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and so forth. The 5 flavors are the classical 5 basic flavors in Chinese cuisine. What does that mean, that they blind us, deafen us, and numb our mouths? Just this, that if you conceptualize the color, you conceptualize it discretely. So if we name something red, then we tend to see scarlet, crimson, brick red, and so forth, all as the same color. We see sky blue, indigo, navy blue, all as blue. And so what we do is we take a varied, multifarious world towards which we could just open our eyes and see a wide colored palette, and we restrict it into boxes defined by conceptual categories, defined by the words and concepts we have. The 5 tones enable us to hear maybe a perfect, dominant tone or a perfect tonic, but they deafen us to the notes in between, to the quarter tones we might hear in an Indian scale. And you can hear this yourself. Many people who grow up listening only to Western classical music, when they listen to Indian music, think everything is out of tune because their ears are tuned to just hear the 5 tones, as it were, or the 8 tones or the 13 tones, depending on how you think about the Western scale. And so the Tao Te Ching is pointing out that conceptualizing and freezing these categories doesn't help us to hear, doesn't help us to see, doesn't help us to taste, but rather breaks a continuous reality into pigeonholed little bits. And so occludes reality, doesn't reveal it. Riding and hunting make our minds wild. Hard to get foods make us break laws. Again, you can see how that works. A lot of the things that we encourage as such great things, in fact, just cause trouble. Thus the rule of the sage puts the stomach over the eyes, thus he picks this over that. And the idea here, of course, it's the same metaphor. The right thing to do is take instinct over conceptuality. Allow yourself to hear, allow yourself to see, allow yourself to taste, and stop the labeling. And do your choosing instinctively, not conceptually. Now, let's move into morality more explicitly. And we're going to see a kind of recap of some of these important discussions that we saw earlier. In chapter 18, the text says, when the great way disappears, that is, when we lose our ability to harmonize with the Tao, we meet kindness and justice. We've seen that. We already know how that one goes. But now listen to how it continues. When reason appears, we meet great deceit. That is, what we need to do in order to get ourselves to be dishonest is to start the conceptualization going. Dishonesty doesn't come from instinct and natural behavior. It comes from calculation. When the 6 relations fail, we meet obedience and love. That is, when our natural relationships to other people fail, we need to tell people how to behave. Listen to your father. Do what your mother says. You need to love your grandmother right now. And of course, all of that creates this artificial, cramped behavior that's nothing like human behavior. And when the country is in chaos, we meet honest officials. The need for officials in the first place, the need for sheriffs and judges, only emerges when we have chaos. If things are behaving naturally and orderly, we don't worry about them. These officials only get their point from trouble. The background is what we ought to pay attention to. If we care about our officials, it's because there are problems to solve, not because our officials are so wonderful. And so the text admonishes in chapter 19, get rid of wisdom and reason, and people will live 100 times better. Get rid of kindness and justice, and people will once more love and obey. Get rid of cleverness and profit, and thieves will cease to exist. But these 3 sayings are not enough. Hence let this be added. Wear the undyed and hold the uncarved. Reduce self-interest and limit desires. Get rid of learning, and problems will vanish. The uncarved and the undyed. Return to nature. Don't try to create new cultivation. Get rid of those Confucian ideas. And so the text is urging us that morality is harmed, not helped by sophistication, cultivation, and structure. Our social structures and our artificial values that they embody induce not human progress, but decadence and corruption. And the Taoists argue that the best life is the simple, natural life, not this life of sophisticated cultivation. That's why we have such a serious critique of the Confucian view. And so the Tao Te Ching can say, the Tao does nothing, and yet there's nothing it doesn't do. In Wu Wei, in effortless spontaneity, we get productive action. Remember what we learned in the Bhagavad Gita. Action is always necessary. Refusing to act is itself an action. So oftentimes, not doing something is exactly the right thing to do. If we live our lives peacefully and calmly in harmony with nature, we can calm others. And sometimes the best thing we can do to a life isn't to add more to it, but to cut away. Just as sometimes the best thing we can do to a garden isn't to add more bushes and more trees, but to prune the ones that we have. And once again, what we see in the Taoist perspective is that it's that negative space, the place to go back to, that's the most significant, not the positive stuff that's in front of us, even though the negative space is so hard to see. So this concludes our kind of exploration of Wu Wei, spontaneous, effortless action, and the nature of inaction. This focus on a kind of self-cultivation by reduction, rather than a kind of construction of an ability to achieve external goals, a discarding of conceptual thought, a valorization of natural perception. Stay with us until the next lecture, and we'll go even deeper into the Tao Te Ching, and we'll see how this idea of Wu Wei works itself out in action.